rich old lady dies and her greedy children only show up at the wake to split up the inheritance, but when they ruin the ceremony and throw the guests out, they have to face a reality they would never have imagined. On a gray, rainy day, Ellie, an elderly woman in her 70s, was looking out the window of her room in the hospital, watching the rain fall gently against the large glass window. The gray weather created a veil of sadness that seemed to reflect her state of mind. Did they come today? Her question was laden with anxiety, with each word an echo of her need to see her children one more time. Unfortunately, the answer brought no relief. The nurse, kind young woman, answered gently, "Not today, Mrs. Ellie. Maybe they'll come tomorrow." Her voice was gentle, but the words deeply hurt the old lady, who turned back to the window. Tears began to run down her wrinkled cheeks as the raindrops ran down the window. Ellie felt deeply abandoned. Ellie had 4 children, a pair of older twins, Robert and John, and another pair of younger twins, Claire and Holly, and none of them had visited her in hospital since the poor woman was hospitalized after suffering a stroke. She had to go through this terrifying experience alone in her mansion with none of her children around to help her. Their absence made her days longer and her recovery more painful. Why haven't they come to visit me? Don't they love me? She thought, crying silently as she looked at the pouring rain. The old lady remembered the days when her children were younger, when the house was full of laughter and love. They really seemed to love her back then. They depended on her not just for sustenance, but for comfort and advice. Why did they have to grow up? She asked, like a rhetorical question laden with longing and disappointment. Over the last few days, the old lady had tried to contact them several times. She called, left messages, but there was no reply. Their silence was deafening, a clear sign of their growing distance. To her dismay, she eventually discovered that she had been blocked by all 4 of them, prevented from making calls that could interrupt the life they had chosen away from her. The only communication left was by email, and the only reason they hadn't blocked her from emailing them was that despite being over 40, the old lady sent them an allowance every month, laying there, looking up at the gray sky that seemed to be crying with her. Ellie had her heartbroken one more time. The sadness of seeing her children treat her like a stranger and the pain of abandonment was almost unbearable. Their indifference wounded her deeply, leaving a mark that no doctor could heal. Ellie, now at 70 years old, had been a woman of remarkable determination and success, who had inherited her husband's pipe factory after his passing. Widowed with 4 young children to raise, Ellie took on not only the role of a mother and a father, but also of a business leader, continuing the legacy left by her husband with tireless dedication. However, running an entire company on her own and looking after her 4 children was no easy task. Her children, Robert, John, Claire, and Holly, spent most of their time under the nanny's care and necessity, given the intensity and demands of her work. As a result, Ellie often arrived home only to find the children already asleep, with the silence of the mansion magnifying the loneliness in her heart. At such times, she would whisper softly to them, "I love you, my children," words drifting in the wind. This involuntary, airy distance, although caused by her responsibilities as a provider, led to a growing emotional detachment on the part of her children. They grew attached not to their mother's loving presence, but to the material comfort that her work provided. Over the years, this detachment evolved into a dependence on the luxury and money that the factory generated, shaping them into spoiled and ungrateful adults. Both sets of twins, now grown up, did nothing but spend the money their mother provided them with. Each of them had moved to a different country, living a life of luxury and waste, sustained by the generous allowance of $200,000 they received every month. They were very distant, petty figures, devoid of the warmth and affection that Ellie had always hoped to share with them. The situation deteriorated further when Robert, the eldest, influenced by exclusive circles of power, devised a planned to take over the company and leave. His mother powerless. Maybe it's time for the old to give way to the new, he said, disregarding all his mother's sacrifice. But Ellie found out about the coup, and the shock and betrayal she felt were devastating. They didn't speak for months, until in a gesture of maternal love she forgave him. Despite her forgiveness, the emotional scars remained. She often blamed herself for being an absent mother, even though she knew she had done everything to ensure her children's well-being. But now hospitalized after a stroke and very weak, the harsh reality of her loneliness was becoming palpable. None of her beloved children had come to visit her, sitting alone in her room, looking out of the window as the rain fell outside. She couldn't help but feel the pain of a broken heart. Even if I died, they wouldn't come to see me. And so it was when the news of Ellie's death reached her children's ears, they knew it was time to return home, not driven by grief, but by the prospect of inheritance. A lavish wake was organized worthy of the legacy of the successful businesswoman Ellie had been. If she were alive, she would see how important and strong she was, and that her absence was caused only to provide her children with the best in life. Perhaps she would appreciate it on the day of the wake. The atmosphere was filled with sadness. People gathered around her coffin, which was elegantly adorned with delicate roses, mourning the loss of the great woman. The four siblings arrived together, watching the scene with a mixture of discomfort and obligation. It even seemed that for a brief moment, when they saw their mother's photos and videos of her life and achievement, something inside them seemed to sadden, and they even shed a few tears, although it was more for appearances and genuine sadness. As they circulated among the guests, they received compliments and heard over and over again that she was an incredible woman. However, despite the words of consolation and admiration for their mother, the siblings' thoughts were focused on something else. I can't stand it any longer. I want to leave as soon as possible, John muttered, impatient and uninterested in the tributes to his mother. The others agreed, eager to take their share of the inheritance and leave. Let's stop by the mansion first and get whatever's valuable in there, and then we can go and talk to the lawyers to check on the inheritance, said Celia, her voice filled with cruel relief. I'm glad that old woman is dead, Robert said, without a hint of remorse. Me too. We're finally going to get what's ours, said Holly, greedily, not even hiding her relief at her mother's death. As the wake went on, the siblings began to openly discuss who should get the biggest share of the company. The argument, although they tried to be discreet, was full of tension and selfishness. I deserve more than any of you. I'm the eldest, Robert challenged, his voice rising higher than he had intended. You always thought you were the man, right, Robert? But just because you're the eldest doesn't mean you'll get everything, John retorted, his eyes sparking with rivalry. Celia and Holly tried to intervene, each fighting for a bigger piece of the empire their mother had built. This display of greed and lack of respect did not go unnoticed. Those present cast disapproving glances in the siblings' direction, muttering among themselves about their lack of decorum. It's a real shame, said one of Ellie's oldest friends, shaking his head in disgust. The siblings' argument over the inheritance in the middle of their mother's wake only served to confirm what many already suspected. They were spoiled and attached, interested only in what they could gain from their poor mother's death. Criticism soon spread among the guests, many of whom thought it was a horrible act that they were discussing without respect for their deceased mother. But the wake continued. The place was filled with flowers, soft whispers, and the occasional sound of muffled sobs. A priest, standing in front of the closed coffin covered in roses, began the ceremony with words of comfort and hope. We are here not only to mourn the loss of Ellie, a woman of great strength and dignity, but also to celebrate her life and the many lives she touched. The people gathered in the small church listened respectfully, many of them long-time acquaintances of hers, others important figures in the community who recognized her contribution both personally and professionally. Then came the moment when the siblings had to speak visibly, hesitant as their distant relationship meant that they barely knew their mother. Beyond what her wealth provided the four siblings walked up the altar with a single piece of paper in hand. They read out a single short superficial declaration: "Our mother was a great woman. May she rest in peace." Claire read her voice devoid of any emotion. That was all. However, as if the lack of preparation and disrespect weren't enough, John added, "Excuse us, but we don't know any of you. So can we get this over with?" Shock and disapproval spread through the church. The lack of empathy and the rush to end the wake revealed their indifference. Robert, trying to regain some control of the crowd, announced, "We thank everyone for coming, but now we need to discuss something important with our lawyers. The wake is over." As the guests stood up to leave while still digesting the arrogance of the siblings who were coming down the altar with a proud posture, a surprising voice echoed from the back of the church, silencing the commotion. "Is that the way to behave at my wake?" Everyone turned in astonishment to the source of the voice. It was none other than Mrs. Ellie, alive, moving slowly in her wheelchair toward the altar. "What, Mom?" The siblings were perplexed, unable to process what they were seeing. The old woman looked at them with an expression of deep disappointment. "I can't even express how ignorant and greedy you four are. How dare you ruin my funeral just to argue about the inheritance?" The two daughters, trying to quickly change tactics, shouted in unison, "Mom, you're alive, hallelujah, hallelujah," and ran to embrace her, but Ellie refused to accept the gesture. "Get off me, you have embarrassed me. I had to fake my own death just so you would come to see me," she said, her firm voice conveying every word with weight and disgust. "And even at your own mother's funeral you act like brats." The siblings were still trying to understand what was happening there. Expressions were a mixture of confusion and surprise. What happened was that in hospital, the old lady, deeply hurt by the absence of her children during one of the most critical moments of her life, a serious stroke from which she miraculously recovered without complications, devised a daring and revealing plan determined to test the sincerity and love of her heirs. She orchestrated a fake wake, hiring actors for every role, from the priest to the supposed long-term friends. As her children didn't personally know any of Ellie's acquaintances or business partners, due to her detachment and disinterest, they didn't suspect anything. At first, seeing her children, Ellie felt a glimmer of hope, perhaps a sign that there was still some real affection left. However, that hope quickly faded when she realized the shallow nature of their feelings, especially when she heard their quarrel about the inheritance and their horrible, dull declaration of mourning. Pain and disappointment flooded the woman's heart when she heard her children express relief at her death and hurry to end the wake to deal with the financial issues. It was the last straw for her, a bitter revelation of the detachment and gratefulness of her own children. "I was testing the four of you, and if you were sincere and committed, I would give you your inheritance right now, even though I'm still alive. But the way you've disrespected and embarrassed me is unacceptable. It's a good thing I had another plan in mind," the old lady explained calmly, each word laden with disappointment and firmness. The siblings, confused and still trying to assimilate their mother's living presence, didn't understand the implications of what she was saying. The revelation that the whole wake was just an act and that they would be disowned took them completely by surprise. "You happy that I was gone? Now, you don't have to worry about that anymore. The four of you are no longer my heirs. You're free of me forever and free of your inheritance too," Ellie declared, looking at each of them with a mixture of sadness and determination. Her words were final, a clear and definitive severing of any financial ties that might keep them tied to her. "Wait, what? You can't do that," they shouted, shocked by the turn of events. The room filled with a tense silence, only interrupted by the murmurs of the hired actors who discreetly watched the scene unfold in front of them and laughed with delight. Ellie, despite being heartbroken to now know the true character of her children, felt relieved to have made the right decision after revealing her living presence and announcing her final decision during the fake wake. She warned that she was going to take drastic and definitive measures regarding her assets. She decided to donate everything she owned to charity the spoiled heirs were against the idea, but as everything was hers earned solely and exclusively by her, they had no power to prevent her from doing so. This decision reflected her desire to leave a legacy of generosity and compassion rather than feeding the excessive greed of her children. The company she had run with dedication and success for so many years was sold, and the money from the sale was carefully distributed among various organizations that help those in need. I chose to live my last days in the house your father and I built a home full of true love and memories. It was the place where we would spend our last years together, she explained serenely, her voice firm. She even sold a mansion and then rented it herself just to ensure that her children would have nothing left when she died. I've kept just enough to live comfortably, and you, my children, will have to support yourselves now. Their reaction was immediate and intense. How can you do this to us? That inheritance is rightfully ours, shouted Robert, his face red with anger. Claire and Holly were equally angry, their expressions contorted into a mixture of incredulity and fury. John, although shocked, remained silent with the gravity of the situation slowly settling in his mind. You have never appreciated the true meaning of family and love. I hope that without the comfort of my money, you will learn what really matters in life. Goodbye, Ellie retorted calmly, but with a hint of sadness. Without waiting for any more protest, she turned around in her wheelchair and walked away, leaving her children and their frustrations behind. In the days that followed, Ellie lived peacefully in her country house, surrounded by the memories of a life lived with purpose. Although she no longer had contact with her children, she felt at peace with her decision. She didn't live for many years after that, but every day was a happy day, lived with a clear conscience of having done what she thought was right. As for her children, they faced the reality that they were now on their own without their mother's wealth to support them. They had to look for work and learn that they only had each other to lean on. Gradually, they began to understand the importance of respecting and being there for those they love, recognizing that their poor mother always sought only the best for them, even if her ways were seen as distant. But now it was too late, and as Ellie passed away, she did so knowing that perhaps her beloved children would finally understand that she had always loved them. And if you like this story, I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will move you too. Don't forget to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next heartwarming story.